So my name's Scott Kersner. I'm editor and co-founder of Innovation Leader, which covers corporate innovation, best practices, worst practices, what to do, what not to do. And as Carrie mentioned, I also write a column for the Boston Globe that covers tech and startups and also bigger companies that have presences in the Boston area like Shell and like Thales. Here's my mission for this session is I just want to get these guys talking a little bit about sort of why they started innovation labs, the thinking behind it, what they're trying to do at these labs, how they're being measured. But I really would like to weave in as many questions from you as possible and maybe as many examples of things you've seen companies do that around innovation labs or innovation centers that works and doesn't work, or what your company is thinking about trying. So does that sound like a good mission for the next 40 minutes or so? All right. I want to start just by taking a quick survey of, could you raise your hand if you're at a company in an operating role, you know, in innovation, R&D, you work for a big company. All right, so it looks like the majority. And then raise your hand if you kind of serve the innovation space, you're an expert consultant, software provider, architect, whatever you might be. So, okay, about a third of the audience. Of the big company people, could you raise your hand if you have something that you would call an innovation lab or an innovation center already? Okay, great. And so we'd want to hear from you for sure. And then raise your hand. Last survey question is just, are you exploring this topic, thinking about setting up a lab, kind of looking for comparables and best practices, but haven't yet done it? All right, super. Well, I really want to get David and Pete talking real quickly. I think I mentioned this already about our mission. We actually just did a report in the first quarter on innovation labs where we talked to companies like Shell, companies like MassMutual, companies like IBM about kind of their approach to innovation labs. Scott Harvey, who's in the back of the room, can you raise your hand? The other Scott has copies of that if you're interested. I worked on my pronunciation all morning, so our two speakers on the left, David Cordonaway, who works at Shell TechWorks in Cambridge, and Pete Roney, who's VP of Innovation and Technology at Thales Explore. Thales, for those of you who don't know, is a French defense, aerospace, and transportation company. And we brought kind of big companies for this session today. Thales has about 65,000 employees, and Shell, the impressive number that one of David's colleagues mentioned to me is 1 million, which is not really Shell employees, right? It's Shell
all contractors in Shell. It's anybody who supports us in our business.
Yeah, so 1 million is a pretty incredible number. Actual Shell employees is about 100,000? Mm-hmm. All right. So I just want to start off definitionally, and maybe David and Pete will take issue with some of this, but the way we define innovation labs is, you know, what do you set up a lab for? They're different from R&D labs where you're kind of working to develop new science and new technology. But we define them as a place to cultivate and test new ideas that's separate from the business units. We find that typically they have some kind of showcase element. You know, they look different. They're often in different locations than the headquarters. That serves recruiting purposes. Shell's lab is really interesting to visit. You know, you could be in part of the Googleplex when you walk through Shell's lab. There's a very strong Star Wars decorating theme there. Everybody is assigned a Star Wars character when they start, and you.
Well, they have to choose it, or it's chosen for them, and they don't like the choices that are given to them. Yes.
And of course, the head of the lab is Darth Vader and has a giant Darth Vader head on his office wall. But one of the purposes of labs, you know, and we've now talked to a few dozen people running them, is a place to expose employees to new tools, approaches, and technologies, often to bring in outsiders like customers or suppliers or entrepreneurs to collaborate, or to help with recruiting a different kind of person that might not previously have thought about working for your company. And then this is the last slide I want to show before we get talking. It's our sort of 6 points of what labs need if they're going to be successful. You know, mission is kind of obvious, proper staffing and resources. We definitely have seen people build a space that looks cool with no people working in it. And, you know, it kind of turns into like, well, it's great meeting space. It's fun for people to have offsites, but what are you really going to accomplish? Support from senior management is one of those phrases that gets said 60,000 times every year at FEI, but gets said because it's true. You need a way to interact with actual customers, right? So you need to figure out how to get marketing to let you talk to customers and bring them into the lab, get their feedback. You need relationships with the business unit executives who are eventually going to take your projects when they're successful to market. And finally, a way to measure results and show the impact you're having, usually in terms of revenue and cost savings, if you want to hope to survive over the long term. So where I wanted to start, and David, I'll ask you first, give us like a minute on sort of what the thinking was that led Shell to create, headquartered in Houston, why did they create Shell TechWorks here in Cambridge?
Yeah, sure. There's, I guess, two aspects to that. Why set up Shell TechWorks and why Boston? So Shell TechWorks was set up primarily to solve some of Shell and oil and gas's biggest problems. If you don't know the oil and gas industry, it's actually very insular. And so the premise behind Shell TechWorks is that no one that works there is from the oil and gas industry. And instead what we do is we take people that are outside that industry, that have an entrepreneurial spirit, and we put them into this group with a primary focus of taking really top challenges within the oil and gas industry and finding different ways to solve it. And actually that's very important that we come from outside the industry with our different lenses to look inside of it. And then why Boston? Well, first, Boston's actually a big energy innovation area. You probably do know that part between places like Greentown Labs and GE moving in here. This is a hub of energy innovation. And the people that are here, whether it's from universities or whether it's just from other startups, have an entrepreneurial bent. That's what we want to capture.
So about how many people today, and you guys, we should mention, are in kind of your own dedicated space? It doesn't have other Shell operations happening there, right?
Right, no, and in fact, being far away from both the Netherlands as well as Houston is important for us because it keeps us different, right? And it keeps us having a fresh perspective. We have about 70 people. Over half of those are engineers doing real engineering on projects that we hope one day will become products commercialized through the ecosystem here in Boston and elsewhere.
And most importantly, what is your Star Wars character?
So I'm General Tarkin. I rule through fear. And I chose that so that I wasn't Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah, and we were talking with the head of marketing for Shell TechWorks, Ellen, just about how few good female characters there are to pick from in the Star Wars universe. If you would like a seat, there are some seats up here. We won't call on you. There's one seat over there, another seat there if you'd like to sit down. One last question about Shell TechWorks, and then I want to move over to Pete. So you said of the 70 employees, literally 0 come with Shell experience. And how did you push back, or how did you and Sean, who runs the lab, push back? Because I imagine most companies would say, like, couldn't you just have 5 or 10 people who know the culture of Shell, who know how we do things, who have that experience, and just integrate them in with 50 or 60 people from outside the company?
Yeah, so that's our secret sauce, actually. We have a premise at Shell TechWorks that in order to innovate, you have to be put in a situation that is materially different than how you would normally do your day-to-day activities. And so for an oil and gas person to do an oil and gas project is part of their day-to-day. And they're going to rely on their expertise and the experiences of others that have done it before them to evolve. And what we really want to do is we want to change that. So we want to put people that haven't seen the problem in front of it, but have solved other problems in other industries so that they can either leverage a different experience or have to go through the exploration of understanding the problem afresh, using the current state of both technologies out there, products, people, to make their own opinions and to create a different product, because we feel that that is what really adds value to the oil and gas industry as a whole.
So Pete, you came into Thales as an entrepreneur, acquired into the company, right? So talk a little bit about how that led to the creation of this innovation initiative at Thales, and kind of maybe how your objectives are different or similar to Shell's.
Yeah, sure. Well, so it's, you can boil it all down to right place at the right time, I guess is kind of how everything works. But we were acquired 2012. It was a small startup. I wouldn't say small, but it was a startup within a larger enterprise called Gentex Corporation, and we were doing helmet-mounted displays for fighter pilots in the military, fixed wing and rotary wing space. It's a really cool technology. And so managed that business for a couple of years, and about the same time we had a new chairman and CEO who had just come from Vivendi, which is a big marketing company. And he came in and he looked at Thales and said, man, this thing is flatlined and there's no life. And so what are we going to do about that? So he went to his executive committee, which is Thales is organized in 6 global business units, each between $2 and $4 billion apiece in revenues. And he said, all right, guys, bring me out-of-the-box ideas, something that's really going to shake it up. And a couple weeks later, unilaterally, they failed. So then he went out and he said, all right, we've got to come up with a different way of doing this. And so he looked at the chief technology officer and the head of strategy, and he said, come on, guys, we got to figure out a better way of doing this. And so we all got involved in a planning process of figuring out how we could touch the startup community around the world. And how does a big global behemoth that moves like molasses in January touch the startup community? And that was the challenge. And so we came up with this idea, which we now call Explore, which is that we would plant this seed of entrepreneurship in some place in the United States, because if you look at the data, this is where startup activity is. And we are going to give that group a mandate to go out and not only touch, but interface with the startup community in a way that not only Thales hasn't done before, but other companies hadn't. And we did it. So instrumental was having the gentleman's name was Jean-Bernard Lévy. So Jean-Bernard gave us his mandate, and he said, go do this. And so off we went. We looked at Silicon Valley. We looked at in the Boston area. I'll be quite honest with you. The reason we're in Boston is because the cost to do something in Silicon Valley was about 4x of what it would have been to do it here. It's hard to say that Boston is affordable, but compared to the Valley, man. So here we are, and our role in life is to break out of the mold, and it's to think about our customers' problems. So we don't just sit here and say, man, I wish I had a new widget, and I'm going to develop. That's not us. You got the wrong shop. What we do is we get out there, and we come up with a big thesis. So let's say big data, for example. And we'll say, Thales really should be in the big data space. What does that mean? We'll go through a rapid management consulting exercise. We'll try to figure out what that means in size, scope, who's in it, who's not. And we'll come up with some theories about where we can actually start a business. And the next thing we do is we immediately go engage with customers. So we'll go out and we'll find, in our case, customers could be airlines, they could be governments, they could be satellite operators. And we'll ask them, we want to co-develop something with you. We're going to invest. We're going to bring in startups. We'll invest in them to solve your problem. And that's what we've been doing now for a couple of years. So,
can you talk, so it sounds like my understanding is your staffing is a little bit different from Shell, right? Where you're a smaller team here in Boston, but talk about, is the team just you? And I remember initially you were talking about rotating executives through the Boston office, so.
Yeah, we've got this merry band of brothers. It's an interesting group. I think like Shell, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I'm proud to say that none of us are really from Thales. And that is now becoming somewhat by design. So we have a small team. It's five full-time folks right now. I think we'll be at about 8 by the end of the year, full-time. And then we bring in what we call explorers in residence from each of our global business units. So each of our business units sends us someone who they determine to be a high potential employee. And that person comes on an expat status for a 3-year contract with us. And we take everything they've learned over whatever time they've been with Thales, and we kind of jettison that. And then we rewire their system to tell them how to think more like an entrepreneur. And
so there's a deprogramming stage
there
when
absolutely
they come
is.
to Boston.
It's funny, we had a guy that came over from our satellite group. He's a great guy. And about a month into it, he pulled a couple of us aside, and he flat out said, he said, man, I can't keep up. This is weird. What you guys do is just weird. And so, which I will acknowledge, we're weird. But we've had to reprogram a bit.
Okay, and one follow-up is just, you talked about engaging with startups. Talk about how that works a little bit, because it seems like maybe does that tend to relate to what you hear from the customers and these strategies where you say, we're going to explore big data? Do you then go look for startups that may be operating in that space, or are those two separate activities?
It's part of the exploration, the process of getting to understand what it is that we're thinking about, and we immerse ourselves in the market. And so that means we go off, we find conferences, we find accelerators, incubators, who's the best in the business. And at the end of a short fuse project, someone who is leading that project will come out being a pretty good proxy for an expert in that particular space.
And is there a model yet for like what a partnership with a startup looks like, or doing acquisitions? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tell you that we're actively involved in M&A discussions of significant scale, and minority investment discussions, as well as licensing opportunities, and then the run-of-the-mill teaming type partnership type stuff.
All right. I want to ask just one more question, and then I'd love, maybe as a first stage, you may have questions, but I also would love to hear if there are other companies that already have an innovation lab and kind of would want to talk about how you're coming at it differently from Shell and Thales, and you're willing to talk for a minute or two. That'd be great. Give us an example of maybe a project, David, that you guys have worked on, and then also at a high level, what are you guys measured on? You mentioned like the whole senior management team of Shell is in Cambridge this week. I'm sure they have a few metrics that they're looking at to see, is this a good investment for us?
Sure. So one of the more public projects that we work on, because we work on a lot, and we typically cycle through projects yearly, so a project's not going to last longer than a year. What we're really out for is rapid deployment of innovation. One product is what we're calling automated pipe sensing. And so an operation that Shell and other oil and gas people do is drilling, and offshore, that's a very dangerous proposition for people. And whether it's weather-related or just the sheer size of the pipes, what we care about is our employees' safety. And so one of the things that Shell looked at very early on was using vision-based systems, and Shell TechWorks primarily, to replace some of the manual operations that we would do in dangerous environments with people, or with robotic arms and vision systems. So we went through a rapid development that we actually use an Xbox and their vision-based system to manipulate arms that would replace people in this dangerous environment with a robotic structure that would do the same and look out for dangers and hazards at a rapid pace that other people just couldn't keep up with. So not only do we make that operation more robust and higher likelihood to succeed, we also removed everyone from the scene so that we could actually take people off of those dangerous environments and potentially, decrease any safety events that would ever occur to us.
Cool.
The second part of the question, now I've forgotten.
Is just what are you measured on?
Yeah. Shell right now, part of oil and gas, is really concerned with cost cutting. And so one aspect in which we are measured is our ability to deploy products that reduce the cost of operation. However, another aspect in which we are measured on is transitioning Shell from an oil and gas company to an energy company. And what that requires is a broader focus on energy and alternate forms, including renewables, and how we can transition Shell to be using a mixture of these types of solutions for our customers.
Great. Pete, why don't you take a crack at that question of how are you measured by your senior leadership? And then I'd love an example or two from other companies.
Sure, it comes down to one word, which is growth. Our global leadership expects to see in the 3 to 5 year horizon measurable growth at the top line of Thales, which is not you think about it, we do about 14 plus billion euro per year in revenues. So depending on the exchange rate, that's somewhere between 18 and 20 billion US dollars. So it's not an insignificant task. But we can bring growth in any number of different ways. It can be through investment, acquisition. It can be through organic investment in new startups. So when we look at our project leaders and we say, hey, we want you to go start a new project, we're not just dabbling in something. I mean, the scope is significant, and so we have no question that those project leaders can actually deliver hundreds of millions of dollars of growth. I say that only because one of them's back there, so
Awesome.
give them a hard time.